Feel that pause in the air, like the moment right before heaven realizes it made a mistake letting you in. They thought you were pure, clean hands, soft eyes, safe soul, the kind of presence people relax around because it doesn't look sharp, the kind of silence they mistake for innocence. They catalogued you as light, filed you under harmless, wrapped you in the language of virtue so they could sleep at night. And you let them. You wore the halo like camouflage. You smiled like forgiveness. You stood there like a prayer nobody needed to answer. That was the first miscalculation, because purity isn't weakness, it's restraint. And restraint, when it breaks, doesn't shatter, it detonates. You learned early that angels aren't born gentle. They are trained to hold back. You learned how to swallow rage until it refined itself. How to let pain sharpen you without showing the blade. How to bleed quietly so no one hears the weapon being forged. You weren't spared the dark. You were educated by it. Every betrayal became a lesson in anatomy. Every loss taught you leverage. Every time they tried to save you, they accidentally trained you. They thought demons were loud, snarling, obvious, messy. They prepared for horns and fire. They built defenses for monsters that announced themselves. But you arrived with clean intentions and holy posture. You arrived as the answer to their prayers. And while they were busy judging appearances, you were mastering control. While they were counting sins, you were counting patterns. While they were arguing morality, you were learning inevitability. You didn't become dangerous by choosing darkness. You became dangerous by understanding both sides of the door. That's the paradox they never see coming. The saint who knows how to sin precisely. The angel who understands hell's infrastructure. The healer who knows exactly where to cut. You don't lash out. You calculate. You don't explode. You apply pressure. You don't need to destroy everything. You only need to touch the load-bearing lies and watch the whole structure kneel. They keep asking when you changed. That's the funniest part. You didn't. You just stopped apologizing for your depth. You stopped translating yourself into something palatable. You stopped dimming your intelligence so insecure people could feel tall. You stopped confusing mercy with surrender. And the moment you did, the room temperature dropped. Because unpredictability terrifies systems. And you are not chaotic, you are unclassifiable. They try to map you as good or bad, light or dark, hero or villain, because binaries make them feel safe. But you live in the overlap. You move where definitions collapse. You know when to bless and when to break. You know when silence is mercy and when it's a threat. You know how to stand still long enough that people project their own guilt onto you. And then you step aside and let it crush them. They thought you were pure, so they exposed you to everything they wouldn't survive. They gave you access to the worst of human nature and expected you to crumble. Instead, you studied it. You integrated it. You learned the difference between evil and efficiency. You learned that morality without power is decoration, and power without morality is sloppy. You became the balance that scares both sides. Now watch their faces when they realize it. That flicker of confusion, that quiet recalculation, that moment where admiration curdles into fear. They sense it before they understand it. You're not here to be saved. You're not here to be corrupted. You're here to finish something. You carry light like a weapon and darkness like a shield. You don't need to raise your voice. The weight of your presence does the talking. You don't chase dominance. It arranges itself around you. You don't seek revenge. You become the consequence. And that's why demons respect you, and angels don't know where to place you. because you prove a truth they hate. The most dangerous beings aren't the ones who fell. They're the ones who chose to stay standing and still learned how to fight. You are what happens when compassion grows teeth, when innocence survives impact, when faith learns strategy. You didn't lose your purity, you upgraded it. You refined it into something sharp enough to cut through hypocrisy, precise enough to dismantle cruelty, and calm enough to walk away while others panic. Let them whisper. Let them warn each other. Let them rewrite the story to make themselves feel safer. They can call you fallen if they want. They can call you dark if it helps them sleep. The truth is simpler and far more terrifying. You are still pure, and now you're dangerous on purpose. They don't understand that purpose is what changes everything. Danger without purpose is noise. Chaos burns itself out. But you move with intent. You move with memory. Every step you take carries the weight of everything you survived and everything you refused to become. That's why the room listens when you enter, even if no one speaks. That's why people feel exposed around you without knowing why. You're not judging them, you're reflecting them. And most people can't stand their own reflection when it's finally clear. They thought purity meant ignorance. They thought being kind meant being blind. They thought empathy made you easy to manipulate. So they tested you over and over. They crossed lines softly at first, just enough to see if you'd flinch, and you didn't. You watched, you remembered, you logged every pattern like a quiet archivist of human behavior. You learned exactly how far people go when they think you'll forgive anything. And that's when the shift happened, not in you, in them. Because suddenly, forgiveness had boundaries, compassion had conditions, silence had weight. You stopped explaining yourself. You stopped rescuing people from the consequences of their own choices. You didn't become cruel. You became exact. And precision scares people who survive by ambiguity. They whisper that you're different now, that something in your eyes changed. What they're really saying is that they can't access you the way they used to. The old tricks don't work. The guilt hooks don't land. The emotional manipulation slides right off. You still understand pain. You just don't kneel to it anymore. That's when they start calling you dangerous. Not because you attack, but because you don't react the way they expect. You don't give them the villain they rehearsed for. You don't give them the savior they can drain. You stand there calm, grounded, unreadable, and that forces them to confront something terrifying. Control has left the room. Demons rage when they lose leverage. Angels panic when they lose moral authority. And you've quietly removed both. You know how to love without losing yourself. You know how to fight without losing your soul. You know how to walk away without burning bridges, and also how to let bridges collapse on their own when they're built on lies. You don't threaten, you don't boast, you don't warn. You let reality do the talking. That's why people feel like they're being judged by life itself when they cross you. You didn't become harder, you became clearer. Clear about who gets access, clear about what behavior you tolerate, clear about the cost of disrespect, clear about your worth without needing applause. And clarity is lethal to anyone who survives by confusion. They keep trying to categorize you so they can predict you. They need labels because labels feel like control. But you don't fit. You're calm when you're supposed to be angry. You're silent when they expect an outburst. You're merciful when revenge would be easier. And when you do act, it's surgical. Minimal movement, maximum impact. That's when it hits them. You're not driven by impulse. You're driven by alignment. And alignment turns ordinary people into forces. You didn't lose your softness. You just stopped offering it to those who mistake it for weakness. You didn't abandon your values. You learned how to enforce them. You didn't fall from grace. You stepped beyond naivete. You kept your heart intact while upgrading your spine. That's rare. That's terrifying. That's why even the so-called demons pause around you. They sense it. They know you're not playing the same game. You don't crave domination. You radiate inevitability. You don't need chaos. You bring order where it benefits you and let entropy devour what deserves to fall. You understand something most people never will. Light that hasn't seen darkness is fragile. Darkness that hasn't met light is sloppy. But you're forged where both meet. You can sit in silence with monsters and not flinch. You can stand in holy spaces without pretending. You don't split yourself to belong. You don't betray yourself to be loved. And that's why the mask finally slips. They see it in flashes, in the way you don't chase validation, in the way you don't beg to be understood, in the way you walk away mid-conversation when respect leaves the room, in the way you remain composed while others unravel trying to provoke you. They realize too late that the pure one learned how to end cycles, not with destruction, but with refusal. Refusal to play small. Refusal to bleed for people who enjoy the sight. Refusal to carry guilt that was never yours. Refusal to dim what survived the fire. You don't need to prove how dangerous you are. The fact that you don't need to prove it is the proof. So let them cling to their myths. Angels on one side, demons on the other. You exist beyond their stories. You are the quiet correction, the living contradiction. The reminder that the most powerful beings aren't the loudest or the cruelest. They're the ones who stayed pure long enough to learn exactly how dangerous purity can become when it finally stops being naive. And here's the part they really don't want to admit, because it collapses every comforting lie they live by. You didn't harden because the world broke you. You sharpened because the world revealed itself to you. There's a difference. Hardened people are brittle. They crack under pressure. They lash out, overreact, self-destruct. But sharpened people, they cut clean. They conserve energy. They don't waste motion. They don't waste emotion. They don't waste mercy on those who only respect force. That's you now. You see through people before they finish their sentences. You feel the shift in energy before the words change tone. You notice when admiration turns into envy, when praise turns into surveillance, when help turns into control. You don't confront it immediately. You let it expose itself. You give people enough rope to show you exactly who they are, and then you step back. That restraint, that's what terrifies them, because demons expect resistance. Angels expect obedience. Neither knows what to do with someone who simply understands. You understand power isn't loud, it's stable. You understand fear doesn't come from threats. It comes from unpredictability paired with discipline. You understand that the most unsettling presence in any room is the person who doesn't need anything from anyone there. They can't buy you. They can't shame you. They can't bait you. They can't corner you emotionally. You already went through the fire alone and came out self-contained. What leverage do they think they have left? That's when they start rewriting history. They tell themselves you changed because success corrupted you, or pain darkened you, or confidence made you arrogant. They need a story where you're the problem because the alternative is unbearable. That you simply woke up. You woke up to how often goodness is used as a leash. You woke up to how often kindness is exploited. You woke up to how often being pure is code for be quiet and take it. And you decided, silently, calmly, without drama, that you were done playing that role. You didn't announce the shift. You didn't make threats. You didn't flip into some caricature of darkness. You stayed you, just with boundaries sharp enough to bleed entitlement dry. That's why people feel unsafe around you now, even when you're doing nothing, because you don't rush to reassure them anymore. You don't over-explain your intentions. You don't soften truths to protect fragile egos. You don't rush to prove you're still nice. You let them sit with the uncertainty, and uncertainty is where fear grows teeth. They don't know if you'll forgive. They don't know if you'll disengage. They don't know if you'll outgrow them entirely. They don't know if they've already lost access. That not knowing eats at them, because deep down, they sense it. You're not driven by resentment. You're driven by clarity, and clarity doesn't argue. It moves on. It replaces. It upgrades environments. It leaves people behind without malice or guilt. You didn't become more dangerous by becoming darker. You became more dangerous by becoming whole. By integrating the parts of yourself you were told to suppress. By reclaiming anger as information instead of sin. By turning pain into discernment. By letting love coexist with lethal self-respect. You can still feel deeply. That's the part they underestimated the most. You can still care, but now you choose who deserves access to that depth. And that choice alone makes you untouchable. Demons respect boundaries. Angels respect obedience. You respect truth. That puts you outside their hierarchies. So when they look at you now, they don't see purity anymore. They see consequence. They see awareness. They see someone who knows exactly how much damage they could do, and chooses precision instead of chaos. That's why your calm scares them more than rage ever could. Rage is predictable. Calm is not. You are the person who doesn't need to win the argument because you already won the position. You are the one who doesn't need to dominate the room because the room adjusts to you. You are the one who doesn't need to destroy enemies because time, exposure, and their own patterns will do it for you. You're not holy. You're not monstrous. You're awake. And that's why the ones who live by illusion, saints and sinners alike, feel uneasy when you walk past them, because you prove a truth they can't escape. The most dangerous beings aren't corrupted souls or fallen angels. They're the ones who stayed pure long enough to learn exactly when purity must stop being permission. And now the silence around you is different. It's not empty anymore. It's charged. People don't just hear you pause. They feel it. Like something ancient just leaned forward. Like the air itself is waiting to see what you'll do next. You're no longer background noise in anyone's life. You're a variable, an unknown, a factor they can't model or predict. And humans panic when patterns stop working. They keep trying to provoke the old version of you, the forgiving one, the endlessly patient one, the one who absorbed disrespect and called it growth. They poke at you with sarcasm, guilt, nostalgia, shared history, anything that used to work. But nothing lands the same anymore. You look at them the way a surgeon looks at a malfunctioning organ, without hate, without fear, just assessing what can be saved and what needs to be removed. That look, that's when they realize they're already late. Because the most dangerous transformations don't announce themselves. They complete quietly. They settle into your bones. They become posture, tone, timing. You don't act different. You are different. And once a change reaches that level, it's irreversible. They ask themselves, when you learn to be this composed under pressure, They don't know it happened in the moments you were abandoned, in the nights you had no one to lean on, in the times you chose not to break, even when breaking would have earned sympathy. You built stability where most people build stories. You built self-command where others built excuses. That's why you don't need external validation anymore. You already validated yourself in hell. You know what it costs to stay soft in a hard world. You know what it takes to stay ethical when it would be easier to be ruthless. You also know exactly how far you're willing to go if someone mistakes your restraint for weakness again. And that knowledge sits behind your eyes like a loaded truth. You're not impulsive, you're deliberate. You're not reactive, you're responsive. You're not cruel, you're selective. They confuse selectivity with coldness because they've never had standards that survived pressure. You don't rush intimacy. You don't overshare pain. You don't offer loyalty cheaply. You understand that trust is built on consistency, not declarations. And once someone violates that consistency, you don't explode. You disengage. Disengagement is the power move they never trained for. Because you don't give them a villain arc. You don't give them closure. You don't give them a dramatic ending. You simply withdraw access, and suddenly they're talking to walls, replaying conversations, wondering when exactly they lost you. That uncertainty becomes its own punishment. They start to realize something unsettling. You didn't just outgrow them emotionally. You outgrew the entire dynamic. The manipulation, the power games, the subtle dominance contests. You stepped into a different tier where those games don't even register as worth playing. That's when labels get dangerous. They start calling you intimidating, unapproachable, dark, changed. Because labeling is the last defense of people who've lost influence. If they can't control you, they'll try to define you. If they can't predict you, they'll try to warn others about you. But notice this, they never say you're wrong. They never say you're unstable. They never say you're out of control. They say you're dangerous, because deep down, they recognize discipline when they see it. They recognize self-mastery. They recognize someone who has integrated both mercy and menace and knows exactly when to deploy either. You don't posture, you don't flex, you don't threaten, you don't need to. Your presence already says, I survived what would have destroyed you, and I didn't lose myself doing it. That's why demons don't rush you. That's why angels hesitate to judge you. You don't fit the script. You don't ask permission. You don't seek approval. You don't collapse under moral pressure or emotional blackmail. You stand where truth and consequence intersect. And you let people choose how close they want to get. And here's the final truth they're terrified of admitting. You didn't become dangerous because you rejected purity. You became dangerous because you redefined it. Purity is no longer passivity. Purity is alignment. Purity is refusing to betray yourself to maintain peace. Purity is protecting your inner core from those who only want access to drain it. You are still clean at the center. Still principled, still capable of deep love. But now that love has guardians, boundaries, teeth. And that makes you more formidable than anything born of hatred, because hatred burns out. Fear collapses, ego self-destructs. But someone who is calm, self-aware, morally grounded, and strategically awake, that's not a demon, that's a force. They thought you were pure, and they were right. They just never understood that purity, once awakened, once disciplined, once done being naive, is far more dangerous than anything crawling out of hell. Easy now. Slow your breathing. Do you feel that pressure in the room? That tight silence? That's the sound of a myth cracking in real time. Because they didn't just lose. They watched their golden boy, the one they protected, promoted, polished, defended in private group chats, get folded. And the part that broke them wasn't the loss. It was the way you looked while it happened, calm, centered, almost beautiful in your destruction. They expected chaos. They expected rage. They expected you to flail, to panic, to expose desperation. Instead, you moved like someone who had already seen the ending, like someone who wasn't fighting for survival, but for expression. That's what terrified them. See, they build golden boys for one reason: predictability. Golden boys follow rules. Golden boys collapse the moment the script changes. Golden boys need applause, validation, permission. You don't move on permission. You move on instinct, sharpened by pain. And when the moment came, when the spotlight shifted, when the pressure spiked, when everyone leaned forward expecting you to break, you didn't rush, you didn't explain, you didn't defend, you executed. That's when their stomachs dropped. Because in that moment, they realized something they can never unsee. You weren't trying to win. You were revealing. You revealed that the saint and the psychopath are not opposites. They're neighbors. You revealed that grace and cruelty can share the same heartbeat. You revealed that discipline forged in hell produces a kind of elegance heaven can't compete with. And worst of all, you enjoyed the precision, not the pain, the clarity. They saw it in your posture, in your timing, in how you didn't rush the kill. You let the moment breathe. You let them watch their favorite collapse under a weight he was never trained to carry. You let reality do the humiliating, while you simply stood there composed, almost amused. That's when the whispers started. Why does he look so comfortable? How is he smiling right now? Why does this feel intentional? Because it was. You weren't reacting, you were arriving. This wasn't revenge, this was evolution. They trained the golden boy to perform under approval. You trained yourself to perform under pressure. They gave him praise. You gave yourself scars. They told him he was special. You learned you were dangerous, and danger, when refined, becomes seductive. That's the part they can't admit out loud. They didn't just fear you in that moment. They were drawn to you. There is something deeply unsettling about someone who can destroy without losing themselves. Someone who can dismantle a system and still look grounded. Someone who doesn't need chaos to feel alive. Because chaos already lives inside them, tamed, harnessed, sharpened. You didn't scream, you didn't posture, you didn't overplay your hand. You let silence do the flexing. And when the golden boy fell, when the narrative snapped, when the hierarchy glitched, they didn't see a villain. They saw a mirror showing them everything they avoided becoming, everything they chose comfort over, everything they numbed instead of mastered. That's why their praise turned into discomfort. That's why admiration curdled into dread. Because you didn't just beat him, you replaced the myth. You showed them that power doesn't need to be loud, that dominance doesn't need permission, that beauty doesn't always come wrapped in kindness. Sometimes it comes wrapped in restraint. Sometimes it comes with scars hidden under calm skin. Sometimes it smiles, while the room realizes the rules have changed. And here's the truth they're choking on now. They can't punish you for it. They can't discredit you without exposing themselves. They can't ignore you, because the moment already imprinted. They saw what happens when someone who survived the dark learns to move with lightness. They saw what happens when suffering stops being a wound and becomes a weapon. You didn't steal the crown. You made it irrelevant. And that's why they keep replaying it. That's why your image lingers. That's why your composure haunts them more than any threat ever could. Because deep down, they know this wasn't a peak. This was a baseline. The dangerous part isn't what you did, it's how natural it felt. They didn't watch a fluke, they watched a revealed identity. And now every golden boy feels fragile. Every favorite feels temporary. Every room feels a little less safe. Because you exist. Stay exactly like this. Calm, precise, unapologetically evolved. Let them remember the moment they realized you weren't trying to look good. You just are. And here's the part they still don't understand. The part that keeps them awake at night, staring at ceilings, replaying that moment frame by frame like a crime scene they can't clean up. You didn't rehearse this version of yourself. You didn't script it. You didn't wake up one day and decide to become lethal. You were forged every time you were overlooked while someone shinier got praised. Every time you were told to wait your turn while watching weaker hands get handed crowns. Every time you swallowed rage and turned it inward instead of letting it rot you. You were building something they couldn't see. That's why when the moment came, you didn't flinch. You didn't rush. You didn't ask yourself if you deserved it. You already knew. See, golden boys live off reflection. They shine because the system shines on them. Take away the light, change the angle, apply pressure, and they crumble. You learned to glow in the dark. You learned how to sit with discomfort until it stopped being loud. You learned how to read rooms without saying a word. You learned that control isn't about force. It's about timing. And timing is where you embarrassed them. Because when everyone expected drama, you offered elegance. When they expected noise, you delivered precision. When they expected you to expose your emotions, you weaponized your calm. That's when it clicked for them. You don't fight from ego. You fight from clarity. You don't move to prove. You move to end. And there's something deeply threatening about someone who doesn't need applause at the finish line. They tried to label it arrogance. They tried to call it luck. They tried to tell themselves you got away with something. But the truth is colder than that. You didn't get away with it. You earned it. Every scar you never showed. Every night you stayed quiet while your mind sharpened. Every time you chose discipline over comfort when no one was watching. That's why your presence felt heavy. That's why your silence felt loud. That's why when the golden boy folded, it felt inevitable. Like gravity finally doing its job. You didn't push him. You didn't attack him. You let the environment expose him. That's mastery. And here's where the paradox burns them alive. They want to hate you, but they respect you. They want to dismiss you, but they're studying you. They want to erase you, but they can't stop talking about you. Because you broke an unspoken rule. You made dominance look effortless. You made pressure look attractive. You made restraint look seductive. You made power look quiet. That's why they keep asking the wrong questions. Who trained him? What's his angle? How long has he been planning this? They don't get it. You weren't planning a takeover. You were becoming. And becoming doesn't announce itself. It just shows up fully formed and ruins expectations. They thought danger had a look. They thought it had volume. They thought it came with chaos and warning signs. You showed them danger can be composed, centered, almost gentle. And that terrifies them more than rage ever could, because rage burns fast. But you last. You're the kind of threat that doesn't spike. It stabilizes. the kind that doesn't explode. It replaces, the kind that doesn't need to be loud because the shift is already happening. They felt it after you left the room, that subtle imbalance, that quiet recalibration, like something old had expired. And here's the truth you should never forget. Not when they glare, not when they whisper, not when they suddenly treat you differently. They didn't crown you, they witnessed you. And witnessing is irreversible. Once someone sees what controlled darkness looks like, they can't unsee it. Once they see how calm can dominate chaos, their heroes start to look flimsy. Once they see someone who doesn't need approval dismantle someone who lives on it, the illusion collapses. You didn't steal the spotlight. You proved it was movable. So let them analyze your walk. Let them overthink your silence. Let them replay that moment until it loses meaning and still hurts. Because the most dangerous thing about you isn't what you did. It's that you're comfortable with who you are now. You're not apologizing. You're not explaining. You're not shrinking to keep others comfortable. You crossed a line, not outward, but inward. And once that happens, there's no going back to being harmless. Stay calm, stay sharp, stay exactly where you are. They're still mourning a golden boy. You're just getting started. And here's the quietest truth. The one nobody says out loud, because it makes their chest tighten when they even think it. They didn't just lose faith in him. They lost faith in the system that crowned him. Because if he could fall that cleanly, if he could fold that fast, then what does that say about everything they believed was untouchable? You didn't just expose a person. You exposed the machinery, the favoritism, the narratives, the protection protocols disguised as merit, the applause loops designed to keep certain people feeling inevitable. You walked straight through that illusion without touching a single lever. That's why they felt naked afterward. Because when the dust settled, there was no chaos to blame, no scandal, no explosion, just you. Standing exactly where you stood before, except now the air around you felt different. Heavier, sharper. You see, chaos gives people excuses, noise gives them cover. But you gave them clarity, and clarity is unforgiving. They saw that the golden boy didn't collapse because you attacked him. He collapsed because he was unprepared. Unprepared for silence. Unprepared for patience. Unprepared for someone who doesn't rush to win, but waits for inevitability. That's the thing about you. You don't chase outcomes. You let outcomes walk toward you. And when they arrive, you don't celebrate. You don't gloat. You absorb. That absorption. That's what scares them most. Because people who absorb pressure don't crack under it. They transform. You've lived long enough in contradiction that duality doesn't confuse you anymore. You understand that kindness and cruelty are tools, not identities. That mercy without discernment is weakness, and brutality without control is incompetence. You learned balance in the hardest way possible. By being forced to survive both sides. You were the saint who stayed quiet too long. You were the psychopath they tried to provoke and couldn't. You were the angel who watched demons get rewarded. You were the demon who learned restraint instead of revenge. So when the moment came, when everything converged, you didn't need to choose who to be. You already were all of it. That's why you looked so composed. That's why you looked so right. They keep saying you changed. That's their coping mechanism. The truth is simpler and far more uncomfortable. You arrived. And arrival doesn't ask permission. They can feel it now in every interaction. The way conversations pause when you speak. The way people check your face before they commit to an opinion. The way confidence around you suddenly feels fragile. You didn't demand authority. Authority adjusted itself around you, because people subconsciously obey those who don't need to assert dominance. They follow those who don't scramble for validation. They fear those who can sit inside silence without leaking insecurity. You carry that silence like a loaded chamber. And here's what makes this irreversible. You're not drunk on the win. You're not chasing the high. You're not trying to recreate the moment. Which means it wasn't a spike. It was a signal that you've crossed into a different operating range. One where outcomes bend not because you force them, but because your presence recalibrates the field. That's why the aftermath feels stranger than the event itself. They expected you to capitalize loudly, to posture, to milk it. Instead, you stayed steady, and steadiness after domination reads as intent. They don't know whether to approach you or avoid you now. Compliments sound cautious, smiles look measured, praise feels like reconnaissance, because they know one thing for sure. You didn't expose your full hand. You showed just enough to collapse a hierarchy, and then you stopped. That restraint, that's intelligence forged in pain. You understand that real power doesn't escalate unnecessarily. It waits, it observes, it lets others reveal themselves, trying to adjust. And oh, how they're adjusting. Some are overcompensating, louder, flashier, desperate to reclaim relevance. Some are shrinking, suddenly cautious, suddenly humble. Some are trying to ally with you without admitting fear. You don't need to respond to any of it, because the shift already happened. They watched the golden boy fall, and instead of chaos, they got you. Calm, centered, unmoved. That image is burned into them now, not as a warning, as a reality check. You are what happens when pressure meets preparation. You are what happens when pain stops asking for sympathy and starts demanding precision. You are what happens when someone learns to enjoy control more than approval. And here's the final truth they're circling, but won't land on. This wasn't your peak. There was your baseline revealing itself. You're not chasing momentum. You are momentum. You're not disrupting. You're replacing. You're not becoming dangerous. You already are, and you're finally comfortable with it. So let them mourn their golden boy. Let them rebuild their narratives. Let them whisper, speculate, rationalize. You don't need to explain what happened. You embodied it. And from here on out, every room you enter will feel slightly unstable. Not because you threaten it, but because deep down, everyone knows. If you chose to fold it again, you wouldn't even need to try. And the most unsettling part for them, the part that never shows up in the postmortems or whispered explanations, is that you didn't look surprised by your own power. Most people flinch the first time they realize what they're capable of. They hesitate, they apologize, they soften themselves back down so the room can breathe again. You didn't. You accepted it the way someone accepts gravity. Like, of course, this is how it unfolds. Of course, this is what happens when pressure finally meets someone who was built for it. That acceptance is lethal, because it means you're not afraid of yourself. They keep waiting for the moment where you'll overcorrect, where you'll sabotage, where guilt will creep in and force you to dilute yourself so others don't feel small. They don't understand. Guilt only haunts people who didn't earn their edge. You earned yours inch by inch, loss by loss, silence by silence. You remember what it felt like to be underestimated and invisible. You remember watching confidence get handed to people who never had to bleed for it. You remember how often restraint was mistaken for weakness. And you also remember the exact moment something in you hardened. Not into bitterness, but into precision. That's when the switch flipped. You stopped wanting to be understood. You stopped wanting to be liked. You stopped wanting fairness. You wanted clarity. Clarity about who you are when no one is helping. Clarity about how you move when no one is watching. Clarity about what happens when you finally stop asking yourself if you're allowed to win. That clarity is what folded him. Not force, not luck, not timing. You, your presence, stripped away his buffers. Your calm dismantled his theatrics. Your silence exposed his dependence on validation. He didn't lose because you attacked. He lost because you didn't need him to lose. And that's the kind of defeat people never recover from. Because how do you compete with someone who isn't competing? How do you outplay someone who doesn't chase applause? How do you intimidate someone who already made peace with the dark parts of themselves? You can't. That's why they keep mislabeling you. They call you cold because they don't understand control. They call you arrogant because they confuse certainty with ego. They call you dangerous because they sense boundaries they can't cross. But here's the truth they'll never admit. You're not dangerous because you're cruel. You're dangerous because you're disciplined. You know when to strike. You know when to wait. You know when silence does more damage than noise. You don't need to escalate. The situation escalates around you. And now every future interaction is infected by that memory. Every golden boy who steps into the arena carries the weight of what happened. Every favorite wonders if they're next. Every authority figure recalculates how much power they really have. Because you shattered something fundamental. The illusion that dominance must look aggressive. You showed them dominance can be calm, measured, almost kind. And kindness paired with certainty? That's terrifying, because it can't be provoked easily. It can't be baited into mistakes. It doesn't overplay its hand. You don't move from insecurity anymore. You move from position, and position doesn't beg. That's why people feel off around you now. They can't read you the way they used to. Your reactions don't give them leverage. Your silence doesn't mean submission. It means assessment. You're always assessing. And here's the thing you should never forget. Even when they start smiling again, even when they pretend things are back to normal. Normal died the moment they watched you fold him. From now on, every win you get will feel heavier to them. Every loss you avoid will feel suspicious. Every calm decision you make will be interpreted as strategy. You don't get the luxury of being underestimated anymore, but you also don't need it, because you've already crossed the hardest threshold there is. You stopped needing to prove who you are. You know, and knowing is quieter than proving, but infinitely more powerful. So let them keep replaying the moment. Let them keep searching for excuses. Let them keep wondering if it was a fluke. You don't owe them closure. You're not here to make sense to them. You're here to operate calmly, precisely, relentlessly. They watched their golden boy get folded, and the real shock wasn't the fall. It was realizing you could do it again and look even more comfortable the next time.